Ladies and gentlemen, ladies, welcome back to another episode of Rowan's Sports Lounge. I am here with Ford Martin, an ESPN analyst. I personally love watching your highlights and just you commentating in general for Gardner Webb, the Gardner Webb football game that you had on your social media. How are you doing today?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for having me.
No problem. I just wanted to ask you a few questions before I get into just the main topics. What got you into sports broadcasting, man? I just got to know from one sports commentator to another.
Yeah, well, I got to give a lot of credit to two different men that have played a huge part in my life. One is Matt Yoakum, who was with the NASCAR on Fox for a long time, and Mike Keith, who was with the Tennessee Titans for about 25 years, and now is the voice of the Tennessee Volunteers football team and does some basketball too. But primarily with Matt Yoakum, I grew up going to the garage area in the garage area in NASCAR. My dad was a crew chief for a long time with Kevin Harvick, Clint Boyer, Robbie Gordon, and I grew up going to the racetrack as a kid. All the guys in the race team were sort of my babysitters. So when I was able to go to the track, a lot of kids that are around my age want to be a driver, a mechanic, a crew chief, like my dad. But I gravitated toward the broadcasting side of things, and one thing led to another, and I uh, I decided I decided to want to do broadcasting, and I was introduced to someone in Matt Yoakum who was doing the pit reporting work. I met him, and he sort of took me under his wing and got me on a couple radio shows segments where I would call in and give my race picks on Sirius XM NASCAR radio, and that was an awesome moment for me. And then eventually moving down the line, I met Mike Keith a few years later through a contest that my mom was able to hook me up with, and I met Mike Keith, and we stayed in great contact. And Mike obviously is a legend himself, the Music City Miracle, the many great calls that he's had with the Tennessee Titans, and those two men they're instrumental in why I wanted to get into broadcasting. So that's primarily the reason why.
That's awesome. I personally, I don't watch as much NASCAR anymore. I usually would watch it with my grandfather because he was a big NASCAR fan, and I would always root for the same guy, which was Kyle Busch, because of how much he loved talking to his pit crew. Um, But I honestly think that's really insane because for me personally, coming into high school, I never really was a big sports fan, I guess, until eighth grade. And the thing about that is that I naturally saw a sports commentating opportunity for my high school's broadcasting team, and I decided to join it. And I did basically everything there is with like sports broadcasting, such as the camera work, play-by-play, and at some and more points, I'd say color analyst because it was easier for me to get the flow of talking and just not being as stressed, knowing what to talk about, how to call the play, and all that sort of stuff for what it is once you're looking at it, because you have to be on the fly constantly with as a play-by-play commentator. Um, but I'd say my best part about commentating was obviously doing halftime and pregame shows. So that's where I kind of got into sports commentating. But it's really interesting how, NASCAR was kind of like your big break essentially, and then you started meeting more and more people, making those connections, and then eventually you expanded your whole horizon essentially. Um,
Yeah, I met so many great people in the garage throughout the years that have been great. From just really from Alan Bestwick to Adam Alexander to Mike Joy to Darrell Waltrip to Larry McReynolds. The list can go on for the amount of people that I met. Shannon Spake. The amount of people that I met in the garage area were really one of the biggest reasons why I got into broadcasting. And just one thing led to another, and just one connection after a connection, and led up to doing a bunch of stuff for MRN radio for NASCAR and the turns. So that was one of the cool things that I was able to do. And And I'm so appreciative of people that were great and gracious to me and gave me their time to learn, and it's part of things that I love doing.
Absolutely. I wanted to obviously ask you, what was probably the hardest game or just like the most difficult game to commentate, do you think? Like if it was like a fast-paced game that you just like either couldn't keep up with or there were too many missed calls or there wasn't enough updates coming from, the sidelines or just any part of where the game was being played all the way up to the broadcast booth.
Um, I think there's been a couple times I think where I was with, I want to say, I mean, pretty much the most part, everything has worked the way it needs to, and I think primarily was maybe it was like a Gardner Webb game that took place last year for a men's basketball game, and we were. It was no fault of the guys behind the scenes or anything like that. It was just we had no audio and then no video, and we didn't know. Primarily, it was one of those things where when we did get all that back, I never could hear the director or the producer, so I had no idea when we were coming back from break. So I had to look over. It's one of the in their arena. It was over to the side, and I look over and they're basically giving me like I can't see the director in their face or anything like that, but I can see their hand just barely in the distance. Give me like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 coming back from break. So I had to do that. And it was a game by myself. So um, yeah, my analyst, unfortunately, I think he called out sick like right before the game was going to start. So I had to do it by myself, which was no problem. But I think the biggest thing is I appreciate moments like that because I feel like it makes you better as a broadcaster. I mean, there's going to be times like, look, when you go call games for the ACC network, the SEC network, and when I've been a part of those games, everything runs, like a well-oiled machine. Everything is going to operate the way it needs to, and but there's going to be times where every now and then something's going to break down, something's not going to operate correctly. And those times where you get to work where things are not going correctly, it makes you a better broadcaster. And I invite people that are a part of that just because, again, when you're calling that bigger game, whether it be for the ACC network or a higher profile college team network for ESPN Plus or one of those things, and something goes wrong, you got to be cool as a cucumber, and you got to be cool under pressure. And I think those are opportunities where that I welcome when that happens, and I feel like it makes you better as a broadcaster.
Yeah, honestly, I feel as if those bits of crunch time that you have to obviously account for. I also had an experience similar to yours, where something was going wrong. Uh, my color analyst actually, I thought he wasn't coming. It was, I think, about 5 minutes before the game was supposed to start, and we were almost on the air and I started getting the countdown, and then the guy who was doing color analyst, I can't remember his name for the life of me. He essentially came in, rushed over to the booth, put on his headset, and turned on the mic. And I felt relieved because I would have had to do both play-by-play and color analyst at the exact same time, which would have been really tough for me, especially when I was doing color commentating for only the high school level. Like you don't really get as much experience as you would have liked to, compared to like commentating in college, commentating professionally, that's completely
Yeah.
different. It's so much of a different atmosphere, I feel like, and there's so much more pressure that you feel like you put on yourself in a sense.
It
Um,
really is. Yeah, it really is. And like I said, you just got to be ready no matter whatever is thrown your way. You got to be prepared for it.
yeah. Um, I'd say one last question, if I can think about it. I had it initially on my mind. Um, I'm pretty sure I forgot. If I do remember it, I'll obviously mention it at the end. Um, but I'd say we'll probably get into our Sunday picks. I'll obviously go first. Then I'll turn it over to you once I'm done saying what my Sunday picks are. But first, I've got the Colts winning against the Chiefs. I got the Seahawks winning against the Titans. I got the Patriots dominating the Bengals. God bless myself because I'm a Bengals fan. I'm gonna absolutely see my team get killed on Sunday. I definitely see the Bears getting the win against the Steelers. They're on a really, really good hot streak right now. I'd say they just need to keep it rolling. Ravens get basically a sleeper win against the Jets. And then I'd say Green Bay gets their win against the Vikings at home in Lambeau. Lions get back on the track into playoff contention and all that sort of stuff after having a few breakdown games essentially with a win against the Giants. I got Jags over the Cards. I've got the Raiders winning against the Browns as it is Shadur Sanders' first start this Sunday, which we'll get into obviously our opinions on that. And then I got Falcons over the Saints. I got Eagles over the Cowboys. And for Sunday night prime time, I got the Buccaneers winning against the Rams. But I understand you obviously have a little bit of a different, pick with the Colts and the Chiefs. And I'd like to know why you chose that, honestly.
Yeah, I think just kind of starting with the Colts and the Chiefs, I feel like just based on the Colts schedule this season, they haven't really been thrown for a lot of bigger games. I do realize I want to say they're coming off the bye right now, so um, they are. I just feel like their schedule has been a bit easy here in the beginning, and when you go play Arrowhead, it's going to be tough. So I think the spread right now is at KC minus 3.5. So I feel like just the Chiefs are coming off a loss to the Broncos, so they're going to be obviously they're going to be trying to get back in the win column, and I just think the Chiefs are just the Chiefs. When you're led by Patrick Mahomes, you're obviously going to be you're going to be in a good spot. So that's primarily, I think, just based on the Chiefs coming off a loss and the Colts schedule is pretty much the reasoning behind it. I hate to say it, but the Seahawks over the Titans. I'm a big Titans fan, but things have been a bit of a struggle for Cam Ward. No really any receivers he's throwing to right now. Just lost Calvin Ridley for the year to a broken fibula. You look at he's throwing to guys like Eric Iomanner, Shimron DK, and Mason Kinsey, and that's not great. So we might see a little bit of a elevation with Xavier Restrepo, maybe from the practice squad, who Cam Ward played with in Miami. When you look at the Bears and the Steelers, I feel like the Bears. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to play this week, so Mason Rudolph will be kind of taking the reins, and I think just the Bears have just been operating pretty efficiently lately. So the Bears for me, and on to the Patriots and the Bengals. I know that I believe I want to say Joe Burrow was a full participant today, but I don't think they're bringing him back this week. Still a
He
long time
uh he
away.
was he was fully participating in practice. I had a notification I believe 10 minutes before we started recording about that and about the
Okay.
analysis over it.
Yeah. So I think it'd be a close game more than people expect. But I think when you lose Jamar Chase, who won't be playing this week, to get the edge of the Patriots. Jets Ravens. It's Ravens. They're on a bit of a win streak here lately. I mean, the Jets have played well, competitive, but I still got to go with the Ravens. Vikings Packers. JJ McCarthy has struggled a little bit too much for me, and that's why I give the edge to the Packers. Giants and Lions. The Lions just, I don't think I don't know if Jackson Dart's playing this week or not, but I think with the Lions, just by the way they've operated, Jamar Gibbs and that group has run the football really well. So the Lions, especially when you're playing in Detroit, Jags, Cardinals, pretty much it's a bit of a struggle here as far as the quarterbacking. I know that Brissett set a record for most passing attempts, I want to say, last Sunday, but I think the Jaguars have that one. Then to the Browns and the Raiders, it's kind of the battle for the to be on pace for the number one pick in the draft. But I know with Shador making his first start, I still don't think Shador has the weapons around him, and I mean he was the third quarterback on the roster, or third on the roster coming in the season for a reason. I think the Raiders do it just because I think the Raiders are a little more competitive, especially with Max Crosby and Brock Bowers and Gentry in the backfield. Falcons Saints. I think Kirk Cousins still has enough to get by the Saints. Actually, I'm gonna correct that. I think the Saints have played pretty well. I mean, they saw what they did against Carolina going into the bye week. They're now coming off the bye, and I really think the Saints. It's kind of crazy I even think it, but a bit of an upset on the Falcons just because of just the type of Falcons roster they have. So I'm going to go with a bit of an upset with the Saints over the Falcons. And then as we get into the two other later Sunday games, Eagles Cowboys, I think the Eagles take in the second game, and then on to the Buccaneers and Rams. It's a bit of a tough game, but I think Baker, after a couple losses, I think he rebounds nicely and pulls the upset in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I personally agree with you on the Browns game specifically. I personally believe that this is probably going to be a loss for the Browns specifically because you are right that Browns don't really have a receiving core when it comes to just games in general. I'd say, Jerry Jeudy is supposed to be the light of the team, but when he's dropping half of his targets, you can't really do much about that. Like either you tell him to catch the ball or, you try and get somebody to, step up to the plate and actually do a bit better. And I could completely agree with, your take on the Cardinals. Jacoby Brissett is definitely doing really well this season so far. I'd say the Jags just come out a little bit better with their win against them, hopefully. Even though Trevor Lawrence has always been one of the QBs in my mind constantly this season because I don't understand what it is about him, but the man just cannot break out. Like he had one really decent, like he had a pretty good season, I want to say, back in 20, like his second year when he made the wild card against the Chiefs, and then unfortunately they lost. Or actually, no, they won against the Chargers, but they lost in the divisional round against the Chiefs. That was a pretty good season that Trevor Lawrence has had, but ever since then, he's kind of just been mediocre, and I just don't know where we can find good spots or just like good, just a good in general spotlight for him. But I can obviously agree with your statement about the Chiefs. They're coming in their Arrowhead, which I guarantee you is going to be jam-packed, knowing the fact that they're taking on a loaded Colts team with an MVP caliber running back in Jonathan Taylor. And, the Chiefs have the defense to, stop it, but are they going to be able to? Or might they fold under the pressure because the Colts also have a good offensive line. You have to think about that as well. They've always had a solid offensive line after 2019, I believe, and then coming into just 2025, you don't really expect them to actually do this good. And I'd say the ease of the schedule definitely was probably one of the factors into the Colts' recent success. But I agree with the rest of your picks personally, and I can also agree with the fact that the Bengals could potentially have a close game against the Patriots. I just feel as if I see the same thing happen, and what it is that the Bengals seem to really like playing their defense in the first two quarters. We think that they're going to get on a really good scoring streak and all that sort of stuff coming out of the half. But what really happens is that their defense just breaks apart for some reason, and then we're down like 24 to the Steelers, just like last week. So I personally believe that the Bengals will play really well in the first two quarters of the game against the Patriots. They'll try and make Drake May struggle, but as soon as they come out of the half, they're either going to get way too cocky about it or something else that is really just going to make it worse for the Bengals defense or just for the offense in general. Like Joe Flacco might not be able to get everything started with the offense in general.
Yeah, I
Um,
think so. I think it's when you look at the Bengals, obviously it's going to be a bit tough. We have a quarterback that's been out as long as Burrow has and coming back, and we're not going to have your number one receiver. I mean, I know you got T Higgins, but I think it's obviously unfortunate because I feel like the Bengals are just you feel like they're the next breakout team, they're going to be there and just find that consistency. I know last year was a bit of a struggle um and uh, and here's of late since they went to the Super Bowl, and now this year with obviously having to pay Trey Hendrickson, and they finally got that locked down, and now they have 3 wins. I know it's not anyone's fault, but you look at the Bengals and you always feel like they're just you expect them to do well, and here they are sitting at 3-7.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate, and I wish them the best in the offseason, but I can't see them making the playoffs. I really can't. As even though they still can probably get a few, like if they win every single game and they somehow make it, they're gonna get knocked out in the first round. There's no doubt in my mind. But I don't even see any possibility of that even happening in general. So, but I'd say to shed some brighter light, I want to ask you a pretty big question. Who do you think is going to win the NFC North? Because it's between the Bears, the Packers, and the Lions. I'd say the Vikings also have a pretty good shot as well, but they're also trying to figure out their quarterback situation with JJ McCarthy. But I'd say the Bears, the Lions, and the Packers have gotten things figured out for them, and they're really putting it all together. It's just who do you personally think is just going to take it all in the end?
I think it'd go with the Lions. I just think just based on their record, I know that a little bit of when you take Jared Goff away from Ford Field, that I know that he struggles a bit, but I just still think there's too much talent on that Lions roster that I don't see them. I mean, they're going to get a couple. I mean, at home, they're incredible. They play really well football, some of their best football at home, and on the road, they know they've struggled a bit. But I think after losing Ben Johnson in the offseason, I think they've responded nicely. And Aaron Glenn on the defensive side of the ball, I think you have to go with the Lions. I think just because again, there's too much talent on that ball team, and I mean, I know that people want to think in the Packers because he went all in on Micah Parsons. But I've seen a little too inconsistency with the Packers here, and I think that's just been the biggest struggle for them is just the consistency thing. And I think with Caleb Williams, just new second year quarterback, I need to see a little bit more, but I think Lions are the easy answer for right now. But we'll have to see how the next few weeks go before you start to see like I think this team's going to run away with it.
I personally agree with you. Honestly, I'm gonna have to go with the Lions as well. It's the fact that they have every single bit of talent that they need on almost every single part of the ball, whether it's receiver with Jameson Williams, whether it's running back with Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery, quarterback, they've got that locked down. They've got a pretty solid O line. They've got defense wherever you need it. Unfortunately, Kirby Joseph, I can't really say much about because he's injured, but I'd say Terry and Arnold could definitely start. He's gotten his first interception finally this season, and I'd say, he's destined to break out at some point later in the season as, it progresses. And with the Packers, I see a few holes. One of them being specifically the lack of identity the receiver core has. Jaden Reed obviously is a really good number one option, in my opinion. I know a lot of people call him underrated, a lot of people call him, overrated just because of the fact that some people shed too much light on him. But I'd say that he's definitely in the place where he needs to be. It's just the fact that the receiving core just doesn't have as much identity as the other teams in the league, especially with the NFC North itself. And the Bears, I completely agree with you on the fact that Caleb Williams, he's young. He obviously needs a little bit more experience in the regular season. They may be able to clinch a playoff spot, but besides that, you don't really see him as going as far as somebody like the Lions or the Packers with a more experienced quarterback under center, such as Love or Goff. It's always up in the air, and obviously injuries can tank their record and stuff like that. So we might just be completely wrong, and the Vikings might actually come out on top. It just all depends on how each team utilizes both their offense and their defense the best, because they've got weapons basically everywhere that you can even think of.
Yeah.
Um, but do you personally think, in keeping on the topic of the NFC North, do you think that Caleb Williams will be that first Bears quarterback that will surpass 4,000 passing yards finally, or just get to 4,000 passing yards?
I think he will eventually. Yeah. I know. I think this Caleb's really has stepped up this year, especially going from year one to year two. And I didn't really think he was all that coming out of college. I was one of the very few that were a little bit of. I didn't know if he was that guy. But I mean, I was kind of the same way on. I'm kind of the same way on Cam Ward. I really didn't like him as a prospect coming out. I was the fan of. I was wanting to sign Sam Darnold, but Caleb has surprised me. I think the way he's played, he's played great football this year, and the leap from year one to year two. So I think I feel like he will get there, and I think he will surpass that. And I don't know about this year, but I think by year 3 or 4, I think he'll be a consistent 4,000 yard passer. Just if he stays in the trajectory that he's on right now currently.
Yeah, I'd say it probably won't happen this season. There's obviously a lot to learn still in your sophomore year, so I can completely understand if you don't think it's going to happen this season. But obviously, once he gets more and more familiar, he starts feeling like a veteran essentially after maybe his fourth or fifth season. He's going to obviously take the big leap that every single quarterback does, and he's going to have a masterclass of a season eventually. I feel like, uh, you know, just looking at him right now, especially. Um, but shifting gears, we are going to talk about a bit of college football, specifically with a certain team that I really hold near and dear to my heart, mainly just for basketball. But on the football side of things, they've been absolutely electric. And I want to know your opinions if Indiana Hoosier football can win it all this season.
Well, I think the biggest thing that I said in that game versus Penn State was, look, you have a late drive. If Fernando Mendoza is that guy, he needs to go down and score here and win the game. If he's gonna be that guy, the number one pick for next year, for Indiana to be looked at as, okay, hey, this team can play compared to last year where it's like, it's Indiana, like they didn't really play nobody. I think just based off that drive alone, I really think they can compete for a national title. I think Texas A&M scared some people this week going against South Carolina. I think Ohio State hasn't really played as many solid teams. I know people could say the same thing about Indiana in some ways, but I know that Ohio State started the season with Texas. I think Texas is a obviously a letdown. So I really think that we'll see a lot out of Fernando Mendoza, and I think they'll at least make the Final Four. Is when it comes down to it, and I think they'll have a chance to compete for a national title. And I think if they get to the national title, I wouldn't doubt Mendoza and the way he's played here lately.
Yeah, I I personally think that they have every single piece lined up. They've got defense, they've got their offense. I'd say, they just win it all. But at the exact same time, you are correct about like Ohio State and Indiana. They haven't really gotten as many big wins as we would have liked to account for. Like, sure, Indiana's gotten a win over Oregon. Like, that's pretty insane in of itself, considering that Oregon's still ranked like in the top 10, even after they lost against Indiana. Because you think like, oh, it's just an upset, and then they're gonna fall off the face of the earth and all that sort of stuff. But no, they're able to compete even in tight games, and I feel as if they've proven it, even if it's not been with top ranked teams sometimes. They have what it takes, to make a huge comeback if they need to get their offense set in a 2-minute drill, and they need to have everything ready, and they need to put everything that they've learned just from this season alone into the playoffs, and they need to know what to do in a really tight situation against Ohio State potentially, Alabama. It all just depends on how the college football playoff bracket obviously situates. So not everything's going to be set in stone. It's not Alabama might not have to play Indiana. Ohio State might not have to play Indiana in the playoffs. It's just, it's obviously thinking about it in perspective before it obviously the final bracket comes out. Um, but I can totally agree with your point of view with Indiana, honestly.
I
Um,
think they're a force to be reckoned with. I think they have a lot to offer, and I wouldn't doubt them here towards the very end.
Absolutely. And, I'd say, Indiana doesn't, Indiana last year obviously wanted to make a playoff run. They got stopped by Notre Dame, unfortunately, but I'd say, they're out for blood, essentially. They're 11 and 0 right now, which is already insane enough, especially with the fact that they've never been 11 and 0 in their football program at ever. So it's pretty insane just to think about the fact that they're doing so well in the regular season that they haven't lost yet, and with the games that they have left, essentially it's just the only way you see them losing if they have either A, an upset, or B, a tight game that just ends in an unfortunate game-winning field goal. But that's just how the game works. So um, I'd say shifting to our next segment, it would be the Bengals, um, and the fact that Joey B is going to be able to come back. Hopefully not this week, even though he was in full attendance in practice today. There's no way he's coming back this weekend. I'd say he's coming back next week, or the Bengals could be very smart, tank for a pick, and leave Joe Burrow to get extra recovery for next season because he's already missed so much. And if we lose another game, our season's basically over with how tight the AFC North race is with Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Um, but I want to know, like, do you think that Joe could potentially, and I mean this with as much sincerity as I can. Do you think that, if Joe Flacco wins against the Patriots, it could happen. I'm not saying it will. If they win against the Patriots and Joe Burrow potentially comes back the next week, do you think he would be able to put together essentially probably the comeback of the century for just the team in general? Do you think that would even be in any picture at all?
I think there's any potential for anything. We've seen people go on runs. We saw Jacksonville did it a couple of years ago to go to the win the AFC South championship. Teams can lose out, other teams can win out. I think it's obvious in this case. I think I'm more on the side of it's unlikely, but anything is possible with it. But I don't think the Bengals, the AFC North. There's too many other teams that are going around against. I mean, I know the Browns are the Browns, but I think with just the Ravens are playing some of their best football right now, and the Steelers right now. And I know with the AFC North the way it is, there's no runaway favorite, but I think right now the Steelers are playing good football, and it really comes down honestly to just see how the Aaron Rodgers, how he does with his fractured left wrist, and how he's able to work. I don't know if he's gonna be playing this week. I don't think so, but it really just comes down to seeing how he will operate. So that's gonna be the biggest question. But as of right now, I don't think the Bengals will. But we've seen a lot of stuff before where it can surprise you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can completely agree with you on that one. It's anything could happen. It's, I mean, there's nothing is really set in stone, even for good teams. So it just depends on if the Bengals can tack a few wins here or tack a few wins there. And, the Steelers and the Ravens don't seem to get everything together. The Bengals could obviously get themselves back in the place that they want to be, but it's not always possible. So there's always a chance of them just missing, which it seems pretty likely
Yeah,
now that they're 3-7. So,
yeah.
but moving to our last segment is obviously we got note today that Shadur Sanders is going to be starting Sunday against the Raiders. What do you think about this?
I hope Browns fans are happy. They've been screaming it. They didn't want Dylan Gabriel to play. They wanted Shador to play. I think that Shador is pumped up a lot by the media. I think he was a okay quarterback. I think a lot of people had a problem with him as far as how he was in the locker room and the pre-draft process. And I mean, look, this is a guy that fell to the fifth round for a reason. And he would want to have in the locker room. So I hope that the Browns fans are happy. They've been screaming for his name. He got sacked a lot. I mean, it's in the same situation Cam Ward's in right now, just no offensive line, and I think this will finally put to rest. I think a lot of people out there that have been wanting to see Sanders play, they're going to have their chance, and I mean, he's going to be starting against a really easier opponent that he's going to go up against. So I think he'll play well. It's that little juice. It's like in hockey when you pull a goalie, you have somebody else back there between the pipes. You get a little bit of a bump in your play. So I think the Browns will come out hot, but it all comes down to the second half to see how the Raiders manage it.
Yeah, you know, it's always fun to see a quarterback get put into a tough situation because you never know how they're going to perform, especially depending on, you know, where they were drafted, you know, what their attributes are good, what they're bad. I personally say that he might fold under pressure, because he's now just starting to get practice with the main squad, with the starting roster. Well, he's been practicing with the second strings and everything else, you know. I'd say I see a lot more potential because Shador definitely has a better arm. It's just he needs to know how to use it, but he needs to get basically everything down pat for this game,
Mm.
and it's probably already stressful enough for him as it is. So I'd say not to expect too much for him, even though like he obviously didn't put up much of a performance against the Ravens last week. It doesn't exactly mean that he can't do something against the Raiders. But I'd say one person that he's probably going to be scared half to death of is definitely Max Crosby because he with the
That's
O
right.
line, like you
Real
said,
fun.
he's going to be on his butt like every single play of the game, and he's probably going to have to roll out at least like 20 different times against the Raiders, but I'd say he probably, you know, knowing the fact that he's able to do that in general, and probably would actually sling it to a wide receiver rather than Dylan Gabriel basically just throwing it away half the time he sees like a no risk pass on an open run. You know, I'd say he has more potential to accomplish what Dylan Gabriel couldn't. You know, even though and Dylan Gabriel essentially reminds me of 2021 Carson Wentz. You know, he has good stats, you know, touchdown to interception ratio and all that sort of stuff, decent yards. But when you actually look at him play and the decision making he has, you kind of think, how is this guy putting up the stats he's, you know, throwing with, but he's not playing like he should be. Like that doesn't exactly make much sense to me. But I
Yeah.
started realizing, you know, it doesn't always have to matter about stats. It just has to matter about what the quarterback does, essentially, even if, like, you know, you see the fact that he has a bunch of yards in a game. Well, you also have to take a look at the fact that the dude had a 50% completion percentage in more than half of his games. Like, sure, that may look decent, but the QB average is like 65% normally. That's way under. And his QBR was pitiful half the time. I don't think like people really analyze that, and people who still actually believe in Dylan Gabriel realize that. They don't actually take a look at more than just yards, touchdowns, and interceptions. Like that doesn't it boggles my mind knowing the fact that people have the audacity to overlook stats like that because they're not useless.
Right.
They're supposed to be looked at in general, especially when you're trying to determine what QB to draft, what QB to trade for, what QB to sign in free agency. You know, you just got to overlook these stats, and that's what normally GMs or just coaches look at during like off seasons or just potential game-changing moves in general. I'd say that Shador Sanders, obviously, his QBR was, I believe he had a 13 QBR, which doesn't really scream much considering that we've seen players have 101 QBRs in just multiple times in a season. So I don't really expect much from him at with the game against the Raiders. But if he does perform well, I'd say give the fans credit where credit is due. But he needs like a tough opponent to obviously go against to obviously determine and to show him like a challenge and all that sort of stuff, give him like as much experience as he possibly needs, like throw him into pressure. Obviously don't
Sure.
get him injured, but throwing him into the biggest challenge that he could possibly get in the league as of right now would probably be his best case scenario. That way he can learn as much as possible during the off season and be prepared for next season. If Dante Moore or somebody else gets drafted or anything like that to the Browns, depending on who you look at. If he's still starting next season, you could expect big things if he gets thrown into a good spot.
No, yeah, I agree. I agree. I think it just comes down to just get selling the game, young quarterbacks. It's you got to be able to, especially going up against a good defensive line in the Raiders. So he has a tough task ahead of him, but it's really fun to watch him play.
Absolutely. Well, I believe that wraps up everything we've talked about and wanted to talk about. Before, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. I know obviously it was a little bit out of the ordinary. I just decided to DM you and all that sort of stuff, asking you if you could come onto the podcast and all that sort of stuff. But it's a shot in the dark. Not everybody gets the opportunity to talk to an ESPN analyst every single day and all that sort of stuff, even though I've already interviewed one and all that sort of stuff. But I'd say obviously getting the experience from commentators and just analysts in general and stuff like that, it really improves, how easy it is just to talk to them and all that sort of stuff, even outside of, the broadcast booth and all that sort of stuff. Um, and I personally just say it just improves my experience overall with just talking to people in general.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
I will see you guys not next week because next week is Thanksgiving, and obviously we won't have anything that week, but we will definitely have something with my friend Jordan, hopefully the following week. It's going to come down to crunch time with college and all that sort of stuff, but I cannot wait to have another episode with him. But it was obviously a blast having you on Ford. But peace out, everyone.